Today we are going to look at a CD player from TEAC, the very catchily named VRDS-701. And we will assess the 701 with only one side-by-side comparison because I think that's really all we need. And we're going to do so using music you might read about in Rolling Stone, Stereogum, and Pitchfork.
This episode is brought to you by T+A, makers of the Solitaire P headphones. Click the link in the show notes for more information.
Welcome back, everybody. Yes, the 701 is a higher-end CD player from TEAC, which sells for €2,500. And I got one in the middle of last year after a tip-off from a patron, and boy, was he right about this unit. It is a total winner. And I've been living with the 701 for the past 9 months, and during that time I've used it side by side with the Hegel Viking that we reviewed last year, and I found the TEAC to sound more open, more alert and more detailed, and it also sounds more finessed in the top end. Now that comparison was with the extremely audiophile friendly Gaucho from Steely Dan, and the rest of the test system comprised a Cambridge Audio Edge pre-power combo and the Monitor Audio Silver 107G speakers that you see behind me. I'm laughing because it's just another ridiculous mouthful for a name for a hi-fi component. But then I repeated this side-by-side comparison with 3 other CDs, namely Proem's Socially Inept, Thomas Dolby's Aliens Ate My Buick, and LCD Sound System's American Dream. And I came to the same conclusion, that the TEAC isn't quite as dark sounding as the Hegel Viking, but it does give us a better look at the smaller stuff. You might call it analytical, but you wouldn't call it cold or bright. And by the way, if you're a fan of Boards of Canada or Aphex Twin and you don't know Proem, you really need to remedy that situation immediately. But I guess the headline for this side-by-side comparison is that the Hegel CD player sells for €5,000, so twice that of the TEAC. But let us not forget that these are not night and day differences that we hear between speakers and rooms. These are much smaller differences. Now, ordinarily, this would be the end of the story. But in the case of the 701, it's only the beginning. Even if the audible differences between these two CD players come down to a matter of taste, and they might, the 701 gives us a lot to talk about. So firstly and most obviously, we load the CDs via a slide out tray mechanism. That tray, I've got to say, feels a bit fragile when open, but I'll take it over a slot loader any day. And that tray mechanism isn't any old tray mechanism. It's called a VRDS, which means vibration-free rigid disc clamping system. Now, VRDS was developed, I think, quite a long time ago by TEAC in-house. I think it's built in-house, and it is designed to specifically reduce vibrations by sort of clamping the CD to an aluminium turntable inside the machine. And obviously Americans and Canadians, you get an aluminum version. So it's not a third-party tray mechanism, and it's not a third-party DAC either. The 701's DA converter doesn't use a chip from the likes of AKM, Wolfson, or ESS, or any of those types of companies. It's still a Delta Sigma design, but it's a discrete circuit designed and built in-house by TEAC in Japan. However, I should point out that the 701 is made in China, and the 701's internal DAC exits from the back via single-ended or balanced connections, just like the Hegel. And we also get coaxial and Toslink outputs for hooking the 701 up to an external DAC, but unlike the Hegel, we also get digital inputs on the TEAC, and not just Toslink and coaxial, but USB too. So during the 9 months of living with the TEAC CD player, I have fed it digitally with a FiiO R7 streamer and a Bluesound Node X. Now, why would I do that? Well, because the TEAC's own DAC, to me, sounds more together on the uber complex bits of LCD Sound System's American Dream than the DACs found in each of those network streamers. And the TEAC unit also sounds more effortless when unraveling, I guess, also the complexities of another album, Brian Eno's Another Green World. And the 701 does so without sounding quite as thin as the Eversolo DMP-A8. I'm not saying the A8 is a thin sounding DAC, but I definitely think the TEAC is a bit more substantial, a bit meatier, especially in the mid-range. And the 701 sounds more microdynamically alive with the CD of Robin Hitchcock's Kershaw sessions than when Roon streaming the same contents via that Chinese streaming DAC. And once again, these differences are not huge differences. Now, the majority of my streaming to the Node X and the R7 and also the R9 was done using Roon, because each of these three devices is Roon ready and can be connected digitally to the TEAC CD player. And I think CD players that offer digital inputs really stand out from the crowd. And they stand out because they allow us to bring streaming source devices into the picture without also concerning ourselves with those streaming source devices' sound quality. So the bare minimum hardware needed to get a Roon stream into this TEAC CD player is a Raspberry Pi running Roon Bridge and then feeding it into the CD player over USB. And you could do that for less than, what, 100 euros? Anyway, thank you to Roon for sponsoring this video. Now let's talk about headphone listening, because the headphone socket on the TEAC isn't as robust sounding as that found on the Node X and especially the R7. But I found it to be more than satisfactory when powering easy to drive headphones like the FiiO FT3. And the 701 is also a tweaker's paradise. The internal menu system gives us access to different filters and to different levels of upsampling. Now, I think that the latter brings about more noticeable changes than the former, but those changes are still teeny tiny. And for me, internal upsampling works better as spec sheet audiophile catnip. At least it does with my ancillary hardware anyway. I mean, maybe in a more resolving system, you'd hear more from the changes to the upsampling modes or to the filters, I don't know. But one thing I do know is that I pulled marginally, and I've got to underscore marginally here, better performance from the 701 by adding TEAC's CG10M. Now, this is an external clock that promises, at least according to TEAC, to time the data into the DAC circuit more accurately. Now, external clocks like this are more often seen in recording studios where multiple devices need to be slaved to a single clock, and some digital audio engineers insist that the clock should be as close to the DAC as possible. But TEAC asserts that their external clock will more accurately time the data into the DAC chip than the clock does that sits already inside the 701. Now, I'm not here to say who is right or who is wrong, especially as I can't really do that with just one unit. But my job here is to connect the TEAC clock to the TEAC CD player and take a listen. Now, the VU-like meter display on the front of the clock tells us how much heat is being generated by the mini oven that stabilizes the clock's operational, I guess, temperature and therefore behavior. And with the clock switched into the circuit and left to stabilize for at least 10 minutes, I noticed a slight uptick in image solidity on Steely Dan's Gaucho, and maybe a smidge more top-end refinement on the Proem disc. But it's nothing I would call night and day, and in this scenario, I don't think it's worth the 1,600 euros that TEAC is asking for its external clock. So I wouldn't sweat it if you can't afford the clock, because the 701 is still an extremely impressive sounding CD player without it. And I guess we would expect that from its 2,500 euro asking price. So how does the 701 compare to another CD player that you're thinking of? I'm really sorry, I don't know, because I don't have that CD player here right now. I'm sorry, Dave, but I haven't done that comparison. But what I do know is that this CD player's fit and finish are very nice indeed. Now, the rack mount handles won't be to everyone's taste, but the brushed aluminium fascia looks and feels the part, even if it does pick up skin marks quite easily. I said skin marks. The front panel buttons and rotaries have a reassuring stiffness to them, and I especially like the large power toggle switch. And I also appreciate how the Japanese manufacturer hasn't skimped on the 701 or the clock's feet that support it. So instead of a simple rubber insert, we get a multi-part floating design that, according to TEAC, partially decouples each unit from its supporting surface. Why do they do that? Well, apparently it's to minimize the negative influence of unwanted vibrations. Now, that's a claim that tells us that this CD player isn't for anyone already happy with their pawn shop bought Blu-ray player feeding an entry-level DAC. This CD player is for someone who has the money for it, someone who is looking to squeeze every last drop from an existing CD collection while simultaneously elevating the performance of an outboard streaming device, all without setting their savings account on fire. Anyway, if you liked this video, click the appropriate thumb down below and hit the subscribe button if you're keen to see more content like this. And also hit me up on Patreon if you want music playlists for this video and every other playlist that we've made since 2020, or if you just simply want to buy me a cup of coffee to say thank you for this or some other video. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. Now let's talk about headphone listening, because the headphone socket on the TEAC isn't as authoritative, I can't say this word, isn't as authoritative, oh my God. Now let's talk about headphone listening, because the headphone socket on the TEAC isn't as authoritative, and with the clock switched into the circuit and left to stabilize for at least 10 minutes, though I probably did it for an hour on numerous occasions, I noticed a slight, and I've got to underscore slight here, a slight uptick in image solidity on Gaucho, and maybe a smidge, again underline, switched into the circuit and left to stabilize for at least 10 minutes, although most of the time I think I left it. Oh. And with the clock switched into the circuit and left to stabilize for at least 10 minutes, I noticed a slight uptick in image solidity on